Hello friends, in this video we are going to implement register functionality for Friends Forever. So let me quickly recap what we had done in our previous video. So in our previous video we had implemented basic architecture setup, and in that basic architecture setup we had created our database, we've added register table to the database, then we had added EDMX file to our solution, updated that EDMX file from database, and then finally we had implemented dependency injection using simple injector. Now we will continue in this video to implement register functionality. We would implement code to register users to the application by saving their data to the database. The code changes would involve creating the form and controls, posting form data to controller action, and through service saving that data to the database. We'll cover form validation and designing the UI of the register view in the next videos. So let's go to our solution. So this is our Friends Forever project, and we have created security controller for login register operations. We had added EDMX file under models folder. We had also added security service, which would basically help security controller to connect to the database. And under views, we had log on and register view. And then finally, we have a layout view, which is common. Now, in order to implement a flow where we are going to persist user data from form to the database, we need to have a form. We need to post that form to controller action. Then through service, we are going to persist data to the database. So the first thing is to implement a form. So in order to implement a form, we need a view model which will have properties, and we will use those properties to render control on the view. So let's add a folder to the project, and this folder would be view models, and this will have all the view models we require in our application. And to this folder, I'm going to add a class, and this class would be specific to register view, and I'm going to name this as register view model. And in this class we are going to have properties which we have in the database. So we have first name, last name, email, password properties. So these properties we have as a column in our database table, that is register. Then I have a property in this view model, that is confirm password. So this confirm password property would confirm if user has entered same value in password and confirm password control. Then we have message property. So I will use this property as a utility property for setting messages to this property and then showing it on the UI. Now our view model is ready, and you must have noticed like I don't have ID property in this view model. That is because ID is identity column in the database and it is auto generated. So the user is not responsible for providing value for that column. Now the next thing is to go to the view and reference this view model on the view. So in order to reference the view model on the view, I have to use model keyword, then basically reference the view model. So now this view is connected to register view model, and this type of view is known as strongly typed view. Now I can use lambda expressions to generate control from properties. So I'll get rid of this header register. I'll have a div. Inside this div I'm going to render a form. So I will use begin form helper of Razor MVC. Then inside this form I'm going to have a table, and each row of that table will render a control from my property. So I already have the setup for the table. I'll just copy the HTML markup. Now you could see I have a table, and under each tr tag I have two TDs. Each TD will render a label for the property and then the control. Okay, so this scenario is for all the properties like last name, first name, email, password, and confirm password. Now for password and confirm password, I'm using a separate, or you could say different HTML helper, that is password for. That is because the password for would render a text box which would not show text on the text box. rather it will show dots. So by this way your password is hidden from the UI. So basically when you type in the password, that is not visible in the control. Then in the final TR I have two buttons, submit and reset. Submit would submit the form to the controller action, and reset would reset the details. So we are done with the form. Now the next part is we need a controller action to submit this form. So we'll go to our security controller, and you will notice like I have not passed any arguments to this begin form method. So in that case, this form by default will be posted to action method with the same name which has rendered that view, but will be having HTTP post attribute and will have a parameter of type register view model. So we are accepting a object of type register view model. So when the form is posted to this method, the model binding will trigger and it will try to map the user data into this object. So that is what model binding is called. So let me run the application and we would see if this method is called or not on form post. So by default we will be redirected to logon because that is what the configuration is in our route config.cs file. I'll go to register view. So you could see the form has been rendered. Now I will add a value to first name property and click on register. So you can notice like the form is posted to this function, and if I hover on this model, you would see the first name is populated with the user data. So this is done by the model binding. Now let me stop the application. Now we know that all the values would be there in this object. Now we can write code to save this data to the database. So for that I will go to my security service. So we are going to have a function in this. That function would return void, and I'm going to name this function as save user to DB, and this function would accept object of the same type, that is register view model. Okay, let me add namespace of this class. Okay, now same function I'm going to have in our interface. Okay, so inside this function basically I'm going to write a mapping code and then we will save the user data. Now before writing the mapping code, this service security service would be responsible for interacting with the database. So I need to create instance of our entity class, that is friends forever entities. That would be our context object which would help us to connect to the database. So whenever we create a new instance of some other class, we do it in the constructor. So we'll create a constructor for this class. Okay, and inside this class just above the constructor I'm going to have a private variable of type friends forever entities. So this is our context class which would help us to connect to database. Okay, and I'll name it as underscore context and we'll set it to null, and inside the constructor I'll create new instance of this class, and now we can use this context variable in this class, and this context variable would be private to this class. The first thing in this function is to create the instance of user details. So this is the class which is mapped to our database table. We'll create a user detail object. Then we will basically map whatever values we have in this model to this user detail object. So I have that code already with me. So I'll just copy paste those mapping statements. So I'm mapping all the four properties here. We'll just rename this object name. Then finally, we'll access our context object. Then we will access our user details data set and use add method to add our user detail. Then finally, we will call save changes function of context. So by this way, our save user to database function is ready. Now we just have to call this from controller action. So we'll go back to our security controller. Now in order to access security service from this controller, we need to have instance of that security service. Now we are not going to use new keyword in this class itself because we are going to use dependency injection, and we are going to use our constructor to accept that dependency from simple injector. So let's create a constructor for security controller. Okay, and in order to hold the instance, I'll have a private variable of type interface iSecurity service. Okay, so whenever we use dependency injection, we always work with interfaces because it is easy to mock when you want to create a test driven development application. So in this security controller, I'm going to accept dependency, or you could say object of type iSecurity service. Okay, and then we will assign that instance to our private variable. Okay, now you must be wondering where this instance would come from. So this instance would be provided by simple injector. So in our previous video we had configured the simple injector, or you would say dependency injection framework using simple injector. There we had registered our security service. So we had said to the simple injector, like, wherever I am accepting a dependency of iSecurity service, pass me the instance of security service. So that is what we are doing in our security controller. We are accepting a dependency of type iSecurity service. So simple injector would give us the instance of security service. Now we've we have the instance of security service. Now we can access that service instance and call function that is save user to DB, and we'll just pass our model with user data to this service, and service will persist that data to the database. So let's add debugger here and plus in the register method where the form is posted and run the application again. And before saving the data for the user, let me go to our database table and see. So currently I don't have any record in the database. Now the debugger at the security controller constructor has hit, and you would see that the service instance is being passed by the simple injector that would be assigned to our private variable. Okay, now we'll be redirected to logon page by default. Then we'll go to register page. Okay, just removing this debugger, and I'll add values like user1. My last name would be user. Email would be user1@email.com. Password would be user1, and I'll add same in confirm password as well, and then click on register. Now if I check this model object, you would see all the properties are being populated. Then we'll pass that model to the service. Here we are creating instance of user details. We'll be mapping all the values to this properties of user details. Then we'll be saving the data to the database using context object. Okay, so if I go to my database and select the details, you would see the user is being saved to the database. So this is how you can implement a complete flow of passing data from form to controller action and then passing it to service, then finally persisting in the database. So we are done with the video, and we have implemented a basic register user functionality where we are saving user data to the database. So in our next video, we will be implementing form validations where we would validate what user has entered on the form, and will show error messages to the user. So thank you for now. Thank you, friends.